district its name, which we'll see in just a few minutes. That was 1776. But really, during the history of San Francisco, up until the end of the last century, you kind of had two parallel cities that developed. You had downtown San Francisco, which is where the original Yerba Buena was, which became San Francisco in 1847. And you had the Mission, which is 3 miles away. So these two little entities developed very, very differently. And they were linked, the Mission originally was linked with Portsmouth Square, Yerba Buena, by over 3 mile long wooden highway, a planked highway, which crossed swampy areas and the very sparsely vegetated sand dunes, which San Francisco was originally before it became settled and urbanized. So you really had two different communities that developed. And it wasn't until after the earthquake of 1906 that really they merged and became modern cities. So I hope you have your walking shoes on. We're going to be walking around for the next couple of hours. We're going to be looking at a couple of interesting examples of artistic expression, contemporary artistic expression. We're going to see some historical places, and of course, we're going to have a few more food stuff. Sound good? Yes. All right. The Mission is not, of course, as 1776, when the Spanish founded the Mission. But actually, by the time of the earthquake in 1906, the Mission area was vastly white, predominantly. And it became again an Hispanic district, really, especially in the 1950s, when there was a large Mexican population from down here, north where the Church of Guadalupe is, maybe. A lot of the people from that congregation moved into the Mission District and kind of reinvigorated it as a Mexican area. And then in the 1970s and 1980s, we have a lot of Central Americans coming into San Francisco. That's when there was a lot of political stability in places like Nicaragua and El Salvador. So 70s and 80s, then we have another influx of Hispanic population, primarily from Central America. And one of our stops will be Salvadoran. So we're going to walk down 18th Street. We're going to go past one of the most celebrated murals in San Francisco and on to the Mission and Dolores Park. In the Mission and in all of San Francisco. So this building was originally a meeting hall for the Sons of Norway. And so it shows you this area was Mission before it once again became primarily Hispanic. There were a lot of Northern Europeans, Norwegians, Germans, Irish, also Polish. Anyway, this was the Sons of Norway meeting hall. It was purchased by businesses. Something like 20,000 women a year are somehow impacted by the women's. So it's really very interesting here. I'm looking across the road, get a view from the other side as well. There was a little bar here, an Irish bar on the corner, and the agreement that the owner of this bar had was that he could remain on the premises until he died. And he died in 1997, and they got rid of the bar very, very quickly. familiar with all of the. Anyway, this is Dolores Park, and this is somewhat timely because this is a replica of what they call the Mexican Liberty Bell since, what are we today, the 18th, right?
Yesterday, like this Sunday.
So the 16th was Mexican Independence Day. And this was the bell that was supposedly rang around 11 o'clock at night on the 15th, which announced basically the movement to launch the attack to overthrow the Spanish. But this park actually, this was originally a Jewish cemetery. Actually, two different Jewish cemeteries were right here on this spot. And then this land was acquired, you probably know that it's illegal to be buried in San Francisco now. Right? There are only two cemeteries in San Francisco proper. One is at the Mission, which we're going to see. Well, we won't see the cemetery, but well, in 1880 it was decided, and in 1900 finally passed that cemeteries were outlawed. So they dug up most of the cemeteries and they moved everyone to Colma. You know, Colma has like 1,500 inhabitants and about 2 million dead ones. So anyway, this land was acquired by the city in 1905. And there were plans to build a really, really sumptuous and amazing park. There weren't a lot of parks in San Francisco. There were only 4 parks. Washington, which became Washington Square Park, what became Portsmouth Square, Union Square, and one other one, I forget, which is no longer there. So there were great plans for this park. So there's a real dearth of parks in San Francisco. In fact, near here there was a really huge park called the Woodward Recreation Grounds that was built in the 1860s, only lasted until 1894. That was donated by a very rich man named Woodward as actually a counterweight to certain activities which were considered sort of raffish that were going on in this district around the Mission, which became almost abandoned. So in this area there were things like bear fights, duels, baseball games, which were considered sort of low life. In fact, the very first baseball game in San Francisco was called Recreation Grounds down on 14th Street. So all kinds of activities that wouldn't happen in what was the city proper. So and this was all over the country. Central Park was only 4 cities. Anyway, long story. I'm going off on a tangent. 1905, this land was acquired by the city, but their plans for the park were kind of interrupted in 1906 with the earthquake, as you know, and the fires, which destroyed 80% of San Francisco. So, do you know about the Golden Fire Hydrant? Right up there. So, a lot of the Mission actually was saved from the fires because of this fire hydrant right on the street, which for some reason still was functioning, even though everything was supposed to be dry. And it's repainted gold every year. But that fire hydrant was capped, and actually was responsible for saving quite a bit of the Mission from the flame. But anyway, the park also served as a bulwark against the fires here. And then in 1906, when we didn't have the disaster, this was a tent city. This was a refugee city. People lived here for up to 18 months. Then after that, it took on the shape that we see now, which is the park. So, how many of you know this park? Everyone. But if you want, we can just run here to the middle thing. You have quite a nice view over the city, and we'll come back down, and we're going to go over that way by the Mission. Jingles and advertisements. It was basically a combination of, it was called the San Francisco Treat, and it was rice and little pieces of broken up vermicelli pasta with like a sauce packet that was 95% salt, and it was a dish that was very popular in middle America in the 70s, 80s. So Mr. Di-Domenico came up with the idea of rice-a-roni, and he is a graduate of Mission High, and he also Domenico bought Ghirardelli chocolate in 1964 and made it into really a national brand. He did all kinds of things. He also created the Napa Valley wine train, if you're familiar with that little. So, rather an eclectic entrepreneur. This is the Mission Dolores, okay? This was the northernmost of the 21 missions built by the Spanish in the 18th century. The very first one being in San Diego. So there's a marker somewhere over there, which denotes this as the spot, which is the end of what was called El Camino Real, the road which stretched from San Diego all the way up here. So the idea was the Spaniards were building one mission every day's journey. So back then, from what it took one day to get from one point, they built a mission along the way, all the way up here. And this mission, actually, the mission was built originally in 1776, just I think 4 or 5 days before the colonialists signed their famous document on the East Coast. But the original mission was over there. We're going to walk by where it was. And this one was built in 1791, still making it by far the oldest structure in San Francisco. And miraculously, this mission was not hurt at all, basically, during the earthquake and the fires. However, the basilica next to it was fatally damaged, almost completely destroyed. And this was rebuilt. We're going to have a really nice view of it on the other side of the road. This was then rebuilt in, I believe, 1918. And again, this Churrigueresque style. So the missions were actually much more than what we think of today being just a little chapel. This was actually the chapel of the mission complex, which is why actually the most important church is not this chapel, but the basilica, which is a much larger church, capable of holding, of course, a vast amount of people. But the mission would have been a lot more than just a church. It would have been really the center for the community, at least for the European community when it was built in 1791. So it would have been a huge complex. It would have included industrial, farmland, workshops, industrial areas, everything that was relevant to the community. And this was, when it was established, really the only community. The only other thing here when the mission was built in the late 18th century was the Presidio, which was a fortress. So that's very typical of the Spanish crown. What did they do when they settled here? One fist was the church, and the other fist was the military, right? So they built a fort and a church. Now, of course, the native peoples, the indigenous peoples who were living here were the Ohlone peoples, and they lived all over the Bay Area, stretching all the way down to the central coast of California. They were pretty much annihilated, and Father Junipero Serra was the lead Franciscan friar who was responsible for building the missions, and he's a very controversial figure right now. He's still celebrated by many, and he's vilified probably by many more as instigating a very harsh, repressive regime against the indigenous people. So there's a lot of re-examining his role in the history of California. But anyway, he is, and because he was a Franciscan, of course, our city is named after St. Francis of Assisi, right? St. Francis of Assisi, this great medieval reformer, if you want, of the church, who established Franciscan order in Assisi in central Italy. So this building survived, and inside it actually we have also one of the only original 18th century altarpieces, which was only rediscovered in the beginning, the first years of the last century. It's not visible, it's hidden. It's almost been completely covered by subsequent works. So San Francisco, the Bay Area actually has quite a large population of Native Americans. For an urban area, it's one of the largest in the United States, but San Francisco has almost none, probably less than 0.5%. of the population of the city itself is an indigenous origin. Several months ago, I arranged for a university seminar in Alaska and Western Canada for a group of students from Michigan, and the subject was climate change from the perspective of indigenous populations. And I never knew this, but in Canada, they do not like people using the word Native Canadians. They use only indigenous. Why? Because I was born in California, so that means I'm a native Californian, but obviously I'm not an indigenous Californian. So they make that distinction really, really clear. Whereas we still say Native Americans usually to refer to the indigenous population. So what I'd like to do is cross the road. We're going to have a view of this really, really stunning building, and then we're going to head back down towards Europe, mostly from Spain, with certain decorations that are more indigenous to California. So this building again, 1918. Cultural district. This was declared only a few years ago, 2020. And even though we don't have very many Ohlone people left here. By the way, the Ohlones, this is not a tribe that is recognized by the federal government. So they don't get any federal funds like tribes that are officially recognized. So this is an effort to kind of ignite a kind of renaissance of indigenous culture in political awareness in San Francisco. Or bar in San Francisco.
There's a lot of bars in San Francisco, especially in the Mission District, that I can't remember having been.
Well, is that a good sign or? Well, this is the second oldest saloon in San Francisco, 1858.
So is it very fancy inside?
No, well, actually, I haven't been in this incarnation of it, so I can't really tell you. I don't think so. It wasn't several years ago. But so that plank highway that stretched from here to downtown San Francisco, that started right here, actually.
Okay.
And you probably know the saloon in North Beach. They claim to be the oldest bar, but they're not. Most likely the oldest bar in town is the Old Ship, which is probably 1851, so it's got a good 10 years on the saloon.
Where's that?
It's in around Jackson Square area, and it's actually built over a sunken ship, the remains of a whole ship. You know, when the gold rush happened, people came here in their gold fever, and they just ditched their boats. There were hundreds of abandoned ships in San Francisco, like a forest of masts of abandoned ships. So when the landfill was built, the government used the hulls of those boats as foundations for the landfill. And there are at least 12 buildings in San Francisco that are built on top of an identifiable entire remains of an abandoned ship. One is the foundation for the old ship. Anyway, this one is the second oldest bar by most in San Francisco. And a lot of bars, of course, during Prohibition closed down. Some were able to stay in business by operating illicitly as speakeasies, or others became like soda shops. And this one apparently, who knows, they probably served a little bit of something special in the back room, but they didn't close at all during Prohibition. They stayed open as soda shops. And women weren't allowed in bars, a lot of bars, until after Prohibition ended. So the first women's bathroom in this was built in 1933, once Prohibition ended. It was an old storeroom. So if you go in here and go into the ladies' room, you can see when they hastily converted the storeroom to the women's room. They didn't even bother hiding all the plumbing. It's all exposed to the storage. So that was good. All right.
The walls on the street.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a little creek and a lake. some debate, either a little kind of lagoon or some type of swamp lake, which no longer exists. That was on this spot where we're standing right now. The creek was called the Creek of Our Lady of the Sorrows. So when the mission was built, they appropriated that nearby place name. So our next stop really is just on the next street over, but why don't we walk down this alley on a nice little diversion from the main streets, and then we'll take a right and we're going to have some Detroit-style pizza. Enjoy it. Square pan. So if you like it, I'm going to get a couple different things that you can check. So grab a seat. Take a few minutes to try this over. Central America, but generally considered to be Salvadoran primarily. So much so that a few years ago they were declared to be an official dish for El Salvador. So they have a couple of vegetarian ones here. They have a mushroom and garlic, and they have a spinach one. Those are both very good. I think they have a bean and cheese one as well. And then if you want a meat one, they have, of course, chicken. I think there's a pork one. So tell me what you like, and I'll put in the orders. We're going to look at the murals, and we'll come back a little bit. Is that good? When the murals are painted, they're not all of them meant to stay forever. They're constantly rotating, and new talent is coming in and painting new murals. And a lot of these murals are especially imbued with social or political messages. So you're really far away from murals which are primarily decorative. So take a few minutes to walk up and down the alley, and then go back to the features. This is one of the more celebrated ones that has been. This one was done after a famous event that happened here in the mission in 2014, I believe, when some techies from Grammarly, I think. No, I'm just kidding. Some people from Airbnb had printed out a receipt for the use of a little place to play football, to play soccer here in the mission, and there were some kids playing on the soccer field, and these people came with their Airbnb generated receipts saying, well, they had paid $27 to use the soccer field, and the kids say, well, that's not the way it works here. The way it works here is we have a 7-on-7 system. We have two teams, and the first team to score a goal then gets to use the field. And these guys started accelerating the situation, and it was caught on video by a guy named Kai, and it went viral. And so this mural is commemorating that event. The city is not for sale. So there's been for many years this clash between new arrivals, between gentrification, and between the less than wealthy communities that have lived in the mission for a long time. This is just one example of that clash of culture that's going on. treat chocolate here sort of the way that people treat a fine French wine, if you want. So everything's like vintaged, and the origin of the chocolate is noted. In general, they only use 2 ingredients in their chocolate: cocoa, and sugar. And that's it. No vanilla, no other additives at all. No other flavor. It's just straight chocolate in their bar chocolate. I'm not sure about their hot chocolate. I like to make ice cream, so I use their hot chocolate powder, and I make my ice cream. So it's usually good. So if you don't know the place, our restaurant's in the back. I'm going to go and put our order in. Right?